Tropes can be a dirty word in some circles, and there are reasons to be for and against using tropes. However, like most things, I believe it is not about if one ought or ought not to use a given trope or explore a given subject. Rather, it is in how the trope is used and how the subject is explored. I've been fascinated by magical thinking and the linkage between things like horoscopes, numerology, and paranormal content in relation to storytelling. The purpose that these aspects are in fiction and in games is varied and interesting. Today, I would like to narrow focus to explore specifically the trope of amnesia, which is commonly implemented in media and especially in games. It's sure to be an appropriately chilling chat. I'm Murasaki Marley, your macabre manifestation, and I'm here to spill the tea and read the leaves. Let's get into it. Now, what was I talking about? Yes, the trope of beginning a journey with a lack of memory that inhibits information and access to gain skills and experience is an extremely common one. What are the benefits and costs of this approach in the telling of a story? The goal is to have the audience resonate with and journey alongside the character, so there are clear benefits in this respect. In removing the otherwise reasonable knowledge and aptitudes of the character, it removes much of the disparity between the knowledge and performance gap of the character and the audience. This allows for several things. The excuse for otherwise obvious information that inhabitants of the world may know can be again explored without there being continually conjured reason or the dialogue feeling stilted in some manner. There is also the benefit of the player growing in experience and skills alongside the character, such as their synchrony in growth. This serves to mirror the traditional story arcs and provides resonance with character growth and story progression. As in the increasing collection of knowledge and skill collection, or recollection, it provides excuses for the character to begin sans resources and connections that they may otherwise have. This all allows for the character and player to both align on their journey, which is especially helpful in the context of games, where player embodiment makes for a more direct dissonance or disconnect as the character they're controlling possesses knowledge and skills that the player may not effectively wield or is not aware of themselves. This allows for the player to be introduced gently into the game world, systems, and objectives without being overwhelmed if the character has a history that would grant them a great breadth and depth of relationships, competencies, and motivations. There is a reason that an iterative approach to things is the way people learn, rather than taking on the full complexity of a subject matter at the beginning. The gradual manner that information is dispersed and challenges build helps to guard against overwhelm and frustration that might otherwise occur given access to the full set of offerings existing within the space. This also allows for more space to shape the character relationship to the world, which may otherwise be restricted due to the character history and motivation. This allows for freedom to guide things in a more preferential direction and witness the fallout of and impact of your choices. The tropes of amnesia is generally applied as retrograde amnesia, which limits the past formed memories and, as such, still allows for the creation and retention of present experiences. It's clear why this would be both commonly used and accepted in media, as in many ways it can be viewed as the large initial cost in service of not having to pay that cost in smaller increments across a larger period of time. There are studies exploring the tendency of humans to rationalize their behavior or make sense of their thought processes, not as an understanding of what directed their behavior and responses, but in generating the reasoning after the fact to justify it. This is post hoc rationalization, and is what I would like to introduce here. In employing retrograde amnesia at the beginning of a story, it allows not only for the mirroring of the journey by the character and player, but as there can be more freedom for projection and interpretation, this also allows for the freedom to make sense of the actions and consequences in light of the continually constructed context, without being heavily swayed by prior historic or behavioral confines. This is strongest in Western RPGs, where there's a tendency to offer characters that are more meant to act as vessels for the player to inhabit and express themselves through. This enables the player to more fully impress their own narrative and experiences over top the emerging story arc, which provides a blending of canon and personalized narrative to unfold. Horoscopes and other kinds of forecasting and prediction methods are generally general. That is to say, the more specific one gets, the larger the probability that the prediction will be rendered false, Although there is obviously greater benefit in the increasing accuracy of a predictive method in many instances, it is not the case for horoscopes, numerology, and like activities. These balance on a +10 dexterity nice edge, having to favor the doling out of information that has the feel of individual relevance with the robustness to absorb or obscure the inaccuracies or breadth in which it operates. This paradoxical lack of specific meaning can operate as a way in which it becomes more personalized and significant in a way that offering more concrete, assured information would not be able to by providing a mixture of ever resonant and relatable content with loaded space that can be filled by the recipient in a way that best serves them. That will help to afford a sense of control and meaning to things. The mixture of sunk cost, primed expectation, and inclination to pattern connection lend themselves to the taking of more vague notions and disparate components and generating a story that best makes sense of things within the current context. This power of meaning and felt control can serve to help one navigate the otherwise fairly chaotic unknown that is existence. There's also the aspect of scope restriction, which allows for the limiting of relevance such that there can be an alleviation of dissonance by restricted meaning and relevance to a smaller scope, which may isolate things that may introduce challenges with one another. This is similar in the service of story, with the sometimes inconsistent behavior of the player over the course of the journey or the odd emergence of dialogue and circumstance that seem inconsistent in the world arising due to the agent of chaos that the player sometimes manifests as can be diminished in some respects. As the somewhat modular and incidental occurrences over time may occur such that they are, to a degree, isolated from the connectivity with the otherwise contiguous arc. As games are uniquely vulnerable to regress into absurdity, considering the susceptibility of the experience to the whims of the player and the supermassive length at which the content is engaged, the importance in providing a blend of generalization among the more defined and consistent aspects leads to resilience over the work in the face of the fluctuating experience that can be somewhat uncontrollable. When Mercury is in retrograde, it is my understanding that it is in reference to the meaning derived from the perception that the planet appears to be moving against the trajectory that it actually moves along. This seems to be a portentous signal if I were to be pressed on assigning it some significance prior to the exploration of the mechanisms that allow for illusory experiences, the many ways in which sensory processes and perception may fail to reflect reality, and when the zeitgeist was more favorable, it is reasonable to attempt to assign significance to such an occurrence. What's much more disturbing is the lack of an explanation for the observation that the planet has reversed their natural course with no reason or cause whatsoever. This illusion of moving backwards can also be used in story and game experience in order to explore gradually how things were prior to meeting the character, while also in actuality performing the sleight of hand, the manner in which previously planted content and gathered choices and behavior can be paid off in a way that seems resonant. There is an opportunity for the writing of character path not based on predefined historical unveiling, but in response to the present actions of the player. In other words, a manifestation of the far out concept of the present and future having a causal effect on the past. While the kinds of messages that are put out into the game world can offer a mixture of contextual hooks to ground the player and character in the story while allowing space for personal projection and connection to tune the narrative, this process is also an opportunity to introduce anchors that will nudge the experience in a certain direction. There are many ways to influence inclinations, and by remaining cognizant of this while constructing the story framework, game space, and systems, it will ensure that accidental friction or dissonant experiences are minimized, just as the appropriate mixture of musical stings, narrative conveyance, and mechanical synergy can aid in the more emergent and engrossing experience. There can be a detrimental setup of things, such as the experience feeling like it is an uncomfortable or otherwise antagonistic one. This can take the player out of the experience, as this kind of jarring interruption is picked up and encouraged analysis past the game experience to the meta-analysis of the components that make up the experience from a critical perspective. When done appropriately, these things will blend together and not be noticed. But if there is a jarring occurrence that is notable, it can collapse the illusion and pull the player out of the immersion. Another opportunity for retrograde amnesia in storytelling that is relevant to games is the ability for the player to influence the goalposts and to alter them across time. As games are complex, and the introduction of even small amounts of branches may add great complexity into the story. If they are to be consequential, it can seem daunting to introduce such things into your game. But not all things must be of grave consequence, and I will again take the stance that the great thing about games is not their power to tell extreme stories with rigid beats, but to allow for the more procedural aspects to flourish. This process of existing as a character in a living world is what is most compelling about games in my mind, and I have forever been captivated by the offerings that simulation RPGs such as Harvest Moon and Oblivion attempted to offer, and the success of Stardew Valley, alongside the flood of comfy village simulators, points to the desire by audiences for this manner of experience. The story of Skyrim or Oblivion was extremely lackluster from my perspective, and granted that is subjective and not something I intend to explore here, I raise this to highlight that the mundane procedural existence is where the joy can come from in my experience. The ability to shape a character and drive the small arcs within the large narrative make a fulfilling experience even at the expense of what is otherwise an uncompelling overall story arc. Mass Effect shares a similar place in my mind, where despite there being a great deal of criticism I feel I could levy, there is enough engagement and freedom in the present aspects that allow me to overlook the other problems and inconsistencies that are present. Nothing is free. Implementing retrograde amnesia as a story conceit comes with some drawbacks, such as the removal of the main character from being as strongly rooted within the story and game world. This is usually paired with the strange notion that the other inhabitants of the game being absurdly incompetent, and the player character being either uniquely positioned or linked to prophecy such that others will flock to them, pushing them towards their greater destiny. The removal of concrete motivation can be used as an interesting tool to reinforce or contrast the actions later on that the player has taken, but it also requires there to be an inciting incident and motivation that is less personalized, or at the behest of external parties who have staked their fate in you. These aspects can make for a weaker impetus to see the journey through, and although this is not necessarily a problem if you're satisfied with the mere process of experiencing the game world until you are satisfied, it may impact the stakes and damage the compulsion to see things through to the conclusion. Being somewhat removed from the world also makes it a bit more difficult to feel a belonging to it. Even as there may be others who state that they have enjoyed a prior relationship with you, recounting how you used to be before your loss of memory, still remains that you are framed as a drifting soul, passing through a myriad of places that you don't belong. It can be harder to ground your character and your own motivation when giving up the stability and relational connections of the character in favor of more freedom of expression. The expressive favoring can allow for a wider range of discontinuity in character behavior arising from the lack of direct stakes, roots, and relational impact of the character as a result of sacrificing their past. And although I have brought up the benefit of affording a more player-centric goal pursuit that is a consequence of this choice, it is also the case that there remain built-in goals that, if not explicitly stated, still exist as a consequence of structuring your story like this. As the loss of memory and the fragmenting of the character from their past begs, there is set up the drive to recover and understand, to some extent, what was lost. A recovery can become a driving force and anchoring factor, even if it is not desired, to remain in the forefront of the experience. The impact of such a dramatic and central component to identify cannot be overlooked when embodying the character. Without historic ties, it's not possible to maintain an identity. Thus, the character has been in some way slaughtered, and regardless if this is undone, or the degree to which it is, some manner of resolution is going to be desired. This is going to serve as one of the implicit core plans, and there is going to be an inherent expectation for some kind of payoff and resolution of it. Coming back to the notion that this setup provides an opportunity for contrast, I would like to further expound on the idea that the uncovering past aspects of the character may be used to reflect on the past and present choices of the character. Although I have not played it, I have listened to the awesome podcast Watch Out for Fireballs, where they discuss Planetscape Torment. This game seems to really explore this notion in a manner that takes advantage of the meaning of history and of the continuity or lack thereof can introduce complexity into the relationships that the main character has. The nuanced things that may emerge as a consequence of the severing of a character from their past, and the way that they may come to the surface as they either morph into a different person or revert slowly to their previous characteristics, is something that offers a wellspring of opportunity for exploration. And it seems that, past the mechanical service that this trope affords, there's a great deal of attention paid towards the exploration of this aspect. There is plenty of exploration in how this may impact the character, in how they understand themselves, in who someone is when disconnected from who they were, and in relational impacts and complexities that arise from this circumstance. A holograph, in my understanding, is made in a recursive kind of manner, where the parts of it contain the whole in a strange way, a recursive nest containing itself within a subset of itself. And how does that pair with eyebrows? There is an expressive nature and heavy weighting of importance that eyebrows hold that one can only appreciate if they are born witness to one that has gone without eyebrows. The communicative power and expressiveness of just eyebrows says a lot without saying anything at all. And though they work in concert with a myriad of other overt and subtle microexpressions and gestures, each contains in some way the entirety and only a subset of the information. It is the projection of information out into the world, and as the colors of noise are the result of the emphasis of certain frequencies and dampening of others across the audible spectrum, it is similar that through the summation of various modes of communication and the shifting weights in their favor of the overall response that complex messages are continually conveyed, with the reflecting of responses broadcast across the body and the counterbalance of conscious control attempting to modulate the presentation. There is success in varying degrees across different systems, with some being uncontrollable, some easily controlled, and some requiring more concentration. I'm exploring this in a bizarre endcap to exemplify that the many systems that come to make up a game are all working in concert to express the story as it unfolds. As in behavioral posturing, there is a constant mixture of signals being expressed through other characters, the emerging and asserted narrative, the environment, the character stats, the context, the musical cues, and the many other things that come together to create a continuous experience. And although they are somewhat discrete, it is the case that they all contain one another in the sense that, in the absence of a plot beat, for instance, it may alter the experience of the other parts. This feels like an extremely odd place to leave off, but sometimes, when you forget how you got here, you forget where you were going. I hope that this has been a useful conversation for you. I recommend you visit spooky stylist Chanharu on her linked Instagram if you would like further art. She drew this phantasmic ghost. And if you have any feedback or comments, I would love to hear about it in the comments below. And you can also reach out through branchingpath.com to get in touch in alternate ways. I'm Murasaki Marley, and I'll catch you on the flip side. Happy Halloween!